I was thinking of the last century, the 100 years that have just passed. I was thinking how much change has happened in those 100 years. I often thought about that when my dad was alive and he got into his 80s and then unfortunately he had dementia, and I thought in his lifetime he'd seen incredible changes. But let's just extend this to 100 years. So 1924, we've had the First World War. People would have had that clearly in their memory. A lot of their friends and people that they knew, families, would have been decimated by the tragedy of the war, of the young men who had been killed and been sent away. And we were plunging towards the Big Depression, and we were about to see some astronomical changes that had come across in these 100 years. And we've lived through an enormous amount of change. And I do think this is something that we don't really think about terribly much, about the change that has happened and what's forced this change, the reasons for it. We think that it's simply just technology. Technology's come along and it's so-called improved our lives. And I'm not sure that it has improved our lives. It's certainly sped our lives up. It's certainly kept us busy. It's certainly kept us away from thinking about things. So typical things that we've seen, of course, in the last 100 years, I suppose you could say, is commercial flights. And the commercial flights, the ability to take people across the world and give an excuse for flying aeroplanes around the globe, of course, has now created a scenario in which weather changes have been possible, man-made weather changes, climate, geoengineering, I suppose, climate change that is going on as the result of keeping people in the air. Certain nefarious people are able to spray certain chemicals and to control the weather, and we've seen that in the latter part. But the flying of the aeroplane has been quite paramount in the weather changing. We saw the development of television, in which people were encouraged, particularly after the Queen's coronation, to buy a television so that people can be programmed, they can be told and influenced and persuaded to think in a certain way. In fact, away from a much wider type of thought into a more narrow band. And of course, in recent years with commercial television, we've seen the advent of adverts, the commercials, that are very persuasive in telling us and showing us the desirable way to live, the things that you must have, keeping up with the Joneses, the things that are required for a satisfactory life. And we're told what we should have. Interestingly, I very much regaled against all of that and rejected all of that. And when anybody was telling me, for example, in cinema, that's another thing that we've seen, from the motion picture to sound pictures, the ability to influence people through moving pictures and then through television, I very much, when you would hear the hype of a certain film that was being made, a Hollywood blockbuster, everyone would say, you've got to go and see this, you must go and see this. It's very strange, because for some reason I never fell into that trap of going, oh, we've got to see this, it's the latest thing, must have, must see. And I would think, no, I don't want you to tell me whether it's good, bad or indifferent. I don't want it to be influenced by you. I'll go and have a look for myself when I'm ready. And often certain films, I remember the hype when Harry Potter came out and all of that. Oh gosh, and everybody was reading it on trains and saying how marvellous it was. I still have not read Harry Potter, and I've never seen one of the films. I barely know any of the characters other than what I hear in hearsay. And do you know what? I feel much better for that. And there's a number of films that I refuse to watch, really, because now I didn't know why I refused to watch them in the past, but now I realise that, of course, a lot of these films were films telling you about the future. The Matrix is another film I have never seen and still have no desire to be programmed into thinking, even though they say they're telling you what they're doing. I have no desire to manifest that in my life. Other changes that have happened, of course, we've seen the advent of technology rapidly change from analog, which got to a certain point, and then change into the digital technology. The thing that I love about analog, the analog world, is you could figure it out. You didn't need mostly a degree in anything or to have to go on a special course. A lot of the analog world, you could see how something functioned. I used to take tape recorders to bits or record players, and you'd see the belts and the drives that would turn the turntable. You'd see how the needle would sit in the groove of the vinyl record. And that fascinated me. How is it that sound could be on the record itself, this piece of vinyl, and through the needle and through a little bit of electronics come out of a speaker? Or if you go back even further, out of the horn of a gramophone. Typewriters. I love to see how the typewriter mechanism would work. This is why Haynes manuals were so good for people with cars. They could strip them down and repair them if they had half a mind, and you could buy all the parts. I remember changing the steering rack on a Vauxhall Viva back in the, well, very much the early 1990s it must have been, or even the late 80s I think it was. You could get your hands dirty, you could do stuff, you were empowered. These days, what with the technical revolution and digital, we've become less empowered. We have to send stuff off. One of the other things that we have seen, of course, is over the last 100 years is people used to go to the pubs, they used to go to working men's clubs, they would have meetings in village halls, they would discuss what was going on. The papers, the newspapers, actually carried news and not so much just a whole series of adverts, although adverts were there, and some of those very old papers are fascinating for the type of adverts that they carried. But these days you'd be lucky to find a newspaper that carries any news other than some advertising bias. We saw how radio stations and local radio, there were many of them, were actually about the town and the locality, and they would very much be broadcasting stories from that town, and it was important. But now, of course, these have all been bought out by big corporations. And it's the big corporations, we've seen the grab of industry by huge corporations, buying up small businesses, getting rid of sole traders, trying to shut down family-run businesses. We've seen how supermarkets, for example, classic example of small family-run stores have been shut down, run out of town, couldn't compete with these large, big supermarkets that every little helps to help us, the big conglomerate supermarket, make a profit, and you to be downtrodden and dependent on us. We've seen, have we not, how the councils have changed from being an assembly of people who are there to support and help your town and village into now becoming, with no empathy and no humanity in them at all, that they've become businesses. They've been registered on Dun and Bradstreet. They're now corporations. The advent of the corporation has struck across these big, big companies. And we've seen that, of course, when we see how the internet was also a huge challenge for businesses to compete. And then these major big corporate entities that appeared, and we use them without thinking on the internet. Oh, I need to buy something. We go to those very familiar places that at first seemed quite benign and now are very much driven by profit. And we have been so brainwashed that we cannot think outside using a certain number of corporations. It's been a very busy 100 years, and the amount of change, the huge amount of change, the amount that has kept us supposedly to free us up, to give us more leisure time, has actually made us work harder and harder and harder still. And I don't know that we're any better off. I don't feel better off. We've been enslaved by all these gadgets and devices and these corporations that are offering to do all things for us, so that in the end we just become a number. And every time you want to change from one, say, utility company to another, the hold time on the telephone has become ridiculously long. If they give you a telephone number now to ring so that you can actually speak to a person. And we see it's all shifting to this AI technology, in which we men and women, living people, are being sidelined for all this digital technology. We've seen how the youth have embraced all this technology, have found it exciting and fun and sexy, and have gone down that road and have no notion of what the old world was like with analog, with being able to sit and think and cogitate and meditate. We're too busy for that. We're being distracted left, right and centre. We're worried about affairs across the other side of the world that we have no ability whatsoever to help. But we're worried and fretting about all these things instead of looking at ourselves and our families and guiding ourselves in a more holistic way. We've seen how the family used to be a wonderful unit. We would gather together of an evening around the table and have wholesome food and eat and talk about each other's day and what we were doing and the plans we might have for the following day or the week ahead. We've seen how the family again has been split apart, how children have been sent to universities and then end up living hundreds of miles away from their families. We've seen how TV dinners have suddenly become in, and that people are now stuck behind screens, unknowing what they're putting into their mouths. It's just something hot and apparently flavoursome, thanks to chemicals that have been put into the food. We've seen how the supermarkets have dominated the food industry. We've seen how agriculture has gone from wonderful mixed farming, where everything was done on one farm and the farm supported the local economy, to these massive monoculture in which farmers now are so backed and entrapped by the contracts that they have to do, and they've found themselves killing off the wildlife, killing off the landscape with their pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, thinking that they were doing the right thing, and realizing now that they're entrapped. And some of those farmers don't even know that's the problem. They've taken the Satan money, the subsidies, in order to keep going. And we've seen now the threat of a huge famine, thanks to the controlling of the weather, in which we see so much rain coming down and these new, rather sinister blanket white cloud schemes, that people are just not looking up and seeing the crisscross of the climate engineering that is happening. We've had so much change, and it's been so fast, faster than at any other time in history, so fast that we don't sit down and use our wonderful skills. We don't think, we don't communicate properly anymore. We barely see each other. We have no time for one another. The good news is, of course, that the people who have perpetrated all of this, who've pushed this story on and ever forward, they made one mistake. They probably made many mistakes, to be honest with you, but the one mistake they seem to have given us, they gave us the internet, and the internet gave us communication that was rapid, as well as all the change. And they may be thinking, we can program with Netflix and Amazon Prime and the mainstream media and say our messages all within all of that, and keep people away from their own thoughts and their own minds and being able to discuss things. We can poison their food and all of that. But there is a great awakening. And people have cottoned on and they are talking, albeit behind screens and on their phones, which are radiating their brains. But we have woken up and we are talking. And those few people who think that they are in control of all of us and have been for centuries and centuries, in the last decade in which the mobile phone technology and the internet has enabled us to start talking rapidly to one another and slowly wake up and see, after the great event of 2020 in which we were totally duped, most people, not all of us, some people were aware to the big scam and then the medical intervention. These few people who have been controlling our lives are now panicking, trying desperately to keep this going. They're coming to an end. And we need to embrace that end, reject the continual change, I feel, it's just my opinion. Spend more time with our families, support our traditions and customs from the old days, not follow that massive influx of trying to get you on the next trend, whatever that might be, chips in the brain, increased digital technology, the transhumanization, the nonsense that you can improve yourself if you follow this, the acceptance of AI as a notion. We need now more than ever to step back and say, no, we don't need all of this thing. The very basics of life, the simplicity of life, the ability to think for ourselves, to take back responsibility, to reject the big corporations who wish to have our sweat equity and take away and enslave us. We need to say no to all of that. And I think that's what is going to happen in the next few months. We're in 2024, the year of the great revelation, and things are happening. Things are happening that people are beginning to wake up to. And it's an incredible time to be alive, to see this shift, the centuries and centuries of lies and the terrible things that have been done to people, I think is slowly but surely coming to an end. It may be still a bit rough and ready out there. It may be still a bit of a dodgy country. We may have turbulence, but I think those that would control us are panicking, and slowly they are being taken off the board. And for that, I'm very thankful. So keep the faith. We are winning this because we are becoming aware of the great harms that have happened to us.